Hello student, welcome back for the course of MBA semester 4 International Marketing Environment, and today is our lecture number 10, 11 and 12, and the topic of our today's discussion is World Trade Organization. So the primary objective of our today's session is help to understand the World Trade Organization and the overall function and structure of the World Trade Organization, and that is called as WTO. The contents of our today's session are World Trade Organization, functions of WTO, structure of WTO, WTO member countries, WTO and world trade. So let us start the discussion on this World Trade Organization. We are already familiar with the GATT. Okay, GATT was came into existence since 1947, and it was the first free multilateral trade agreement in between the member countries. After the Uruguay round, whenever discussion was took place, nearly 123 nations comes together during that Uruguay round, and finally that GATT agreement has been converted into WTO, okay, that is called as World Trade Organization. So this was the first economic organization in the world that will be helpful to promote the international trade in between the member countries, and also it is called as the intergovernment organization that is concerned with formulation and implementation of international trade in between the various member nations. So WTO is the very big organization, and that will be primarily helpful to promote the international trade across the various countries. Now, when does that WTO came into existence? We are already familiar with the prior conditions of that WTO. How does the WTO came? WTO officially commenced on 1st January 1995. Okay. So on 1st January 1995, under the Marrakesh Agreement signed by 124 nations on 15th April 1994, okay, that agreement, okay, Marrakesh Agreement, okay, replacing the GATT Agreement, okay, which will commence in 1948. So that agreement was discussed, this Marrakesh Agreement was discussed in Uruguay round by 124 members, and it was signed on 15th April 1994, and finally all these member countries, okay, they were decided to convert that GATT into a WTO, okay, since 1948. And from that, okay, WTO is acting as a very apex body, particularly for finalizing the rules and regulations as well as implementation of these rules and regulations to promote the international trade in between the member nations. Now, what exactly WTO will do, okay, or what form of activities are being associated with the WTO? So as we came to know, okay, it is an intergovernmental organization that will formulate some rules and regulation for the promotion of the international trade. So first of all, we came to know WTO deals with the regulation of trade in goods, services and intellectual property between the participating countries or members. So whatever form of rules and regulation which are in support of promotion of international trade, either suppose say all types of goods, okay, all types of goods and commodities, then services, okay, including the intellectual property rights, okay. So that intellectual property, okay, that would be in certain form of services specifically that are being related with pharmaceutical industries or some other industries over there, okay. So that can be included in the WTO. Here WTO do various related activities for the promotion of international trade, and they do formulate the various rules and regulations for that. Now to regulate the things with respect to the promotion of international trade, WTO will perform other several activities, okay. It will provide the framework, okay. This WTO will provide the framework to negotiate the terms and conditions of international trade in between the member countries by means of using certain mechanism. So whichever the member countries, okay, that they comes together in the WTO, okay. So WTO has provided the forum for these member countries to negotiate the trade agreements specifically. So whichever member countries that do want to conduct the international trade, okay, by means of various forms of clauses under the agreement, okay, which are mentioned in the WTO agreement, so that will provide the framework for negotiation of international trade by means of using some sort of agreements. As well as this WTO has provided some mechanism, and that mechanism would be work particularly to handle the international dispute resolution process. So across the world, many of the nations that do conduct some international trade in between the participating members, okay. So WTO has provided the framework for also international dispute resolution. So members, those who are the WTO members, okay, those who are having any particular problems with respect to international trade, so they were introduced the dispute settlement machinery, okay, under the adherence of that WTO agreement. All these participating member countries, okay, they do try to implement whatever form of framework and other provisions has been made under the WTO agreement, okay, which are signed by the representative of the member countries and ratified by their parliaments, okay, of the respective government member countries. So when the member countries they do conduct the international trade, so whatever provisions has been made in the plans and policies of the respective member governments, okay. So whatever form of rules and regulations are being there, okay, the member countries and their government, okay, they need to try to understand all these international trade related measures which are mentioned in the WTO agreement, and accordingly they will conduct the international trade according to whatever form of provisions which are mentioned in the WTO agreement. Then WTO has been primarily utilized to promote the international trade that we came to know. WTO is a very huge organization and that do support the development of international trade in between the member countries. So they do also concentrating on without any discrimination the trade will happen in the member countries. So WTO will provide the discrimination between the trading partners. Okay, they prohibits. So none of the member countries, okay, they tries to discriminate in between the trading partners. Okay, those who are the regular traders, those who are the regular suppliers, okay, and involved in the international trade by means of either export or import. So here WTO has made a provision, okay, so they do conduct the international trade in between these member countries without any discriminations, and they do prohibit for that using some sort of exceptions. Okay, here the member countries, they can think about the international trade, and if suppose there will be some sort of discrimination would be there, okay, that discrimination would be on the either on the basis of using some sort of exception. In exceptional cases only the member countries can think over here whether they want to conduct the international trade with these member countries or not. So it is either on the basis of environmental protection, national security, and other important goals of the respective country. So on these 3 points only, okay, the member countries can think over whether they want to conduct the international trade with that particular host country or not. Otherwise, okay, WTO will not promote the discrimination in between these trading partners. Whatever form of international trade related disputes, okay, that international trade related disputes can be handled by the independent judges, okay, of the WTO through the dispute settlement process, for which the WTO, okay, has set up the machinery for this dispute resolution independently, okay, including some independent judges. It is the international trade related dispute matters will be handled under the process of that WTO agreement. Now what does exactly the WTO will do? Okay, there are 3 parts under which the WTO will perform their operations. So we came to know, okay, WTO formulate the rules and regulations and implement these rules and regulations across the member countries. WTO administers whatever form of multilateral trade agreements between these member countries by means of using the MFN clauses. So WTO has suggested, okay, they do conduct the international trade, okay, by means of minimizing the tariffs and other form of duties, okay, by means of introducing the most favored nation clause with the respective trading partners, those who are also the member of the WTO. Okay, once the individual country will declare the MFN status to the respective country, automatically, okay, the international tariff, okay, particularly in case of export and import, okay, that should be lowered down, and that will be helpful in promoting the international trade in between the member countries. So WTO primarily studying and administrating whatever form of multilateral trade agreements, okay, in between the member countries that exist, okay, and accordingly they do empower the nations, okay, they can involve with the international trade related activities, okay, whether the countries would fit in themselves, and they do think about to assigning the most favored nation clauses to the other countries, especially to the trading partners. So that will be also helping to other nations, okay, and by means of reducing the tariff, and wherever the member countries can promote the exports in between them. Secondly, recently we talk about the dispute resolution, international trade related dispute resolution. We know that doing business is a very tough phenomena, and internationally conducting the international trade, okay, without any dispute, okay, will be a matter of question in the discussion. So many of the member countries, okay, whether they do agree on their terms and conditions or whether they do not agree on their terms and conditions of international trade, there do happen the international trade related disputes, and it is quite necessary to handle these disputes internationally, okay, under the WTO by means of using the dispute settlement mechanism or resolution of the WTO. So whatever form of conflicts are being there, okay, that could be decided by means of using that dispute settlement machinery of the WTO. So it will handle the international trade related matters, say for example dumping. So in case of dumping issue, okay, many of the exporters, whenever they are selling, okay, or whenever they are exporting to other host country at lower prices rather than the cost of production of the respective product, that time dumping will happen. So WTO has also suggested whatever other forms of anti-dumping measures the individual countries can took place, okay, particularly to handle the dumping related issues. Whenever these dumping related activities goes, okay, many of the trader nations, okay, or the exporting nations, they do lower the prices of the product in such a way that, okay, the domestic trade of the other country could be affected, and there may be a difficulty, okay, for the other individual country, and they do find some sort of problems in their domestic markets, okay, and this will cause to the economy of the other nations. So in that case, okay, WTO has suggested some anti-dumping measures to the trading nations. Along with that, WTO staff investigate the issues, okay, they do have their own dispute resolution processes, and they do investigate whatever form of trade related disputes, and they will help to settle down these disputed, okay, or any sort of violations that has been occurred by means of using some levies or sanctions over there. So any other country, those who are doing some dumping related activities, so they do control, okay, WTO will control this kind of activities, okay, this should be considered as a form of malpractices, or that could not be supported by the WTO. Wherever WTO will also take some actions against those countries those are using any such malpractices to the member countries. The third one has been called as how does the WTO will handle these negotiations, okay. They are managing the ongoing negotiations of the new trade agreements. Now new trade agreements will be a part of the international trade. Such kind of international trade agreements will occur among all the different countries. So whatever trade related agreements has been there in between the member countries, the member countries has to send a copy of these bilateral or multilateral trade agreements to the WTO, and WTO will manage their ongoing negotiations, okay, under some observance. So that may be a form of mechanism the WTO has developed, and under the Doha round in 2006, many of the international trade related matters were discussed. This was one of the biggest achievement in promotion of international trade, which took place in 2006 at Doha. So this would Doha round has been provided a very good form of mechanism, particularly for the individual member countries, an opportunity to negotiate the terms and conditions of the international trade. Okay, that will be emphasizing the emphasize. Okay, this will emphasize particularly for expanding the growth of the developing countries. So whatever member countries that they want to conduct the international trade, they put their terms and conditions and other trade related matters very openly and has been discussed in this Doha round. Okay, wherever most of the matters where has been resolved over there, so as to promote the international trade. So simultaneously, WTO, okay, they will look after, okay, whatever form of trade goes in between the member countries. They do monitor, they do study, okay, and handle these international negotiations also. When we are talking about such kind of negotiation, different sort of trade related matters can be get resolved by the WTO among the member countries. So wherever the member countries they do find some sort of difficulty, okay, they were introduces other several clause, okay, by means of using the multilateral trade agreement in the member countries. The first trade agreement here, the WTO has been initiated, okay, by means of conducting the negotiation in between the member countries. General agreement on trade in services. So all types of services wherever which can be exchanged internationally, okay, that can be included under GATS, means General Agreement on Trade in Services. There are some other sort of agreements, okay, that should be comes under, okay, the trade related aspects of intellectual property rights. This is called as TRIPS, TRIPS. Okay, so trade related matters with respect to intellectual property rights, IPR, and patents, okay, especially patents that belongs to some specific industries, say for example pharmaceutics, okay, and other technological goods, that comes under TRIPS. And trade related investment measures, okay, that is called as TRIMS. So TRIMS would be work related with the trade related investment, including the foreign direct investment measures, okay, the WTO has been suggested under the different negotiation, and they do formulate this international trade agreement in between the member countries. Now the functions of WTO. Okay, we came to know about WTO and what exactly WTO is. Now let us see some important functions. WTO, they do formulate some rules and regulations, and implementation of these rules and regulations will be the responsibility of the WTO. So WTO oversees, WTO observe, okay, the implementation, administration, and operation of the WTO agreement. Whether the WTO agreement has been properly implemented by the member countries, or whether they do require some sort of mechanism, okay, by means of giving some support to the member countries so as to promote the international trade. WTO very immensely working specifically for the negotiation in between the member countries and as well as for settling the international trade related dispute. So whatever international trade related dispute that can be discussed under the special mechanism, okay, or that is called as the trade international trade related dispute resolution process. Along with that, okay, WTO has been performing other functions. Okay, WTO's duty is to review and propagate the national trade policies. Individual countries that they do plan to protect their economies, here WTO will recommend the various solutions and other forms of policy measures to the member countries, and so as to ensure the coherence and transparency of trade policies okay, across the world. So any kind of countries, those who are being safeguarding their own interest, okay, that could not be happen under the WTO. If anything related with the international trade and the individual countries policy measures that so is supposed to be not in favor of the promotion of the international trade, okay, WTO will suggest them some international measures, okay, according to whatever form of clauses under the WTO agreement, so as to promote the coherence and transparency in case of promotion of international trade, and for which they are regularly conducting these surveillances. So they do monitor and control all the global economic policy making practices across the world, and they do also look after the various trade related measures take places across the world. So whichever the trading bloc, okay, or any kind of trading partners, those who are involved in the international trade, or any other member countries, those who are involved in the international trade, okay, they do monitor and control the trade related activities in between these member countries. The other functions of the WTO is to provide the assistance in the form of various other policy measures, particularly to the developing nations, least developed nations, and low income countries. Countries those who are not sound enough in case of resources and technologies, WTO will provide them some sort of support. So this is another priority of the WTO, and they do try to promote the international trade from the developing nations, the least developed nations, and other least income countries. So here exactly the WTO will adjust some sort of rules and regulations and in between the advanced nations and these developing nations specifically, and they do tries to promote the international trade by means of using mutual cooperation and training to the WTO members. So whatever rules and discipline through this technical cooperation and training, okay, that they will provide to the WTO member countries, okay, specifically these member countries are developing nations or LDCs, least developed nations, and low income countries. So here the low income countries find more protections under the WTO, okay, wherever these developing nations are asking for some sort of help in the promotion of international trade during that, okay, that can be get resolved under the process of this WTO trade agreement. WTO also, okay, facilitate the implementation, administration, and operations of the WTO agreement. As we discussed initially, they will further the objective of this agreement and of the multilateral trade agreement took places across the world. So whatever form of various other international trade agreement took places, so they do also monitor and identify any sort of international trade related issues and try to resolve that issues by means of using the multilateral, by forming the multilateral trade agreement in between the member countries. So whatever related matters with respect to international trade, it could be get resolved by the WTO. WTO will also provide the forum of negotiation in between the member countries by means of using multilateral trade relations. So each and every member countries, they do try to promote the international relations across the many countries. So WTO will also support over there, okay, by means of using some bilateral or multilateral trade agreement which can be which can be mentioned under the various annexure of the WTO agreement. So various types of agreement could take places in between the member countries, okay, and WTO will provide a forum of discussion, forum of negotiation. We came to know that how does the Uruguay round has been takes place to conducted nearly 87-month discussion was there. Okay, so in this way WTO will promote the international trade, okay, in between the member countries. WTO would also administer the understanding on rules and procedure governing the settlement of dispute. So this is again a very important trade related mechanism by recommended by the WTO. So they were initiated some particular mechanism, or that is called as what, dispute resolution machinery for the promotion of international trade, and that machinery will be called as understanding on rules and procedure governing the settlement of dispute. Okay, understanding on rules and procedure governing the settlement of dispute. So whatever international trade related dispute happens internationally across the member countries, so WTO will administer all the international trade related matters, okay, and that can be discussed under the forum, okay, and finally they do try to settle the international trade related issues, okay, and promote the international trade. Along with that, WTO administer trade policy review mechanism. Time to time the WTO will review the trade policies of the different countries, and they do recommend the individual countries also to try to plan, okay, or to decide some policy measures, okay. They are giving some recommendations to the member countries. So they do primarily administer and try to control the international trade related activities. Some other functions are being supposed to be there by means of formulating some other international apex bodies, okay, which has been mentioned over here. That is called as what, to achieve the greater coherence across the global economic policy making, okay, wherever all the member countries can come together and negotiate whatever their trade related matters. WTO has been provided the mechanism by means of using cooperation. So this can be greatly achieved by means of making some changes in the policy measures and introducing some new trade related practices, okay, that will be supporting the international trade. So they do provide the services. WTO will provide the services to the IMF, okay, International Monetary Fund organizations also, and they give some suggestions also to them. Along with that, okay, there is one another international body that is called as International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, IBRD, and its supporting agency. They do provide the lots of information as well as international trade related matters to this IBRD, particularly which are being governing to the global economic policies. So there are the lots of functions the WTO will perform, okay, rather than monitoring and controlling of the activities in the international trade. They do try to promote the international trade across the many of the nations. Now this is called as the structure of WTO. Okay, how does the WTO will perform their operations, their functions, and they do administer and control their activities and promote the international trade. Primarily there are three bodies, okay. the supreme body that could work along with the ministerial conference. Okay, that ministerial conference is the international body of the WTO, wherever the member countries, the representative of the member countries are being here, okay, in the ministerial conference. Wherever that ministerial conference will conduct the meeting twice a year mainly, okay, and they do try to control and regulate the activities of international trade across the nations. Along with that, there are other councils, three councils the under the ministerial conference will work. The first one is called as General Council, okay. Then General Council for another mechanism has been mentioned over here. Then General Council meeting as a trade policy review body, okay, and another one is first one is General Council meeting as dispute settlement body. So primarily there are two general councils, okay, and the third general council will handle the other various things which are being supported by the general council meeting as dispute settlement body, as well as, okay, general council meeting as trade policy review body. So time to time these individual bodies will do formulate some new rules and regulations. Maybe it is related with dispute settlement or other trade related policy matters, and will communicate it through the general council, okay, and tries to implement using this mechanism. Along with the general council, okay, that general council will be called as the appellate body, and that appellate body will work independently, okay, and handle the issues appropriately. So, and there are some dispute settlement panels over there, okay, wherever the representative of the member countries and the dispute settlement machinery under the WTO, they will try to resolve the issues. Wherever under the General Council, there are some different departments along with Council for Trade in Goods. So all goods or commodities, okay, that trade related matters with respect to goods and other commodities will come over here, and finally it has been discussed. Council for TRIPS means intellectual property rights and patents. There is a separate council for that, and Council for Trade in Services. Services would be only. So various types of discussions on various parameters which can be finalized under these different councils, and these councils work independently, and they will finalizing the rules and regulations. Even under these councils, different committees and subcommittees are there, okay. All these committees and subcommittees, they do discuss, plan, monitor, control, as well as administers the trade related matters, okay, national international trade agreements, okay, the policy matters of the respective government, okay, and they will provide these suggestions time to time by means of using this mechanism. So we do find lots of measures can be get resolved, okay. So we came to know that there are different committees under this body: committees on trade and environment, trade and development. Some subcommittees are being there for, suppose say, least developed countries, regional trade agreements, particularly in between the regions or trade blocks. Countries those are fighting with the balance of payment problems, some special committees are there, okay. Committees on budget, finance and administration of the WTO, working parties on accession, some different committees are here, working groups on trade, debt and finance, trade and technology transfer. Okay, here we are talking about IPR. Okay, some inactive committees, but they do try to study time to time relationship between trade and investment, interaction between trade and competition policy, and some other transparency in government procurement related matters. They do try to study time to time. Under the Council of Trade in Goods, we do find lots of tariff related matters over here. Okay, so market access policies specifically related with agriculture, sanitary and psychosanitary measures, technical barriers to trade. We do discuss about tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers. Along with that, some other technical barriers will be also there. Subsidies and countervailing measures. Okay, anti-dumping practices, custom valuation, rules of origin, where do the production belong to the particular country, some import licensing policies, trade related investment measures, trims, some other safeguarding policies over there, working party on state trading enterprises, primarily where the individual country promote the canalization of the import within the country. Here council of trips would be there. Okay, particularly that will work for the intellectual property rights and patents, and council for trade in services. So here also we came to know about some different committees that could be related with trade in financial services, some other special commitments that may be related with service matters only, working parties on domestic rules and regulations, and GATS. Okay, that is related with the general agreement on trade services rules and regulations, that they do plan and study all the policy matters of these respective countries and try to negotiate with the other nations and protecting the individual economies of the country by means of using some multilateral trade agreement in between the nations. So that is the overall structure of the WTO, and WTO will not only administer, okay, they will implement the complete procedure for the promotion of international trade by means of using the effective international trade dispute resolution. Some other major provisions of the WTO. Okay, so there are lots of provisions along with the functions also. Some special rights for developing countries. Okay, wherever the many of the member countries, that those who are being looking for more type of liberal support, particularly to promote the international trade by these developing countries. So some sort of policy measures has been initiated by the WTO so as to uh, promote the international trade from the developing nations as well as least developed nations. We will call them as LDCs. Treat developing countries more favorably rather than the WTO members of the developed countries. Here, in case of whenever the GATT comes, that time many advanced nations will be the part of the GATT. Where do many developing countries find some difficulties with respect to GATT agreement, and which was not in favor of them. So WTO has provided the mechanism to the developing countries wherever it could not be in the interest of the developed countries only. Okay, the trade related matters could be get resolved across these WTO provisions. These provisions are also called as special and differential treatment provisions. Here, whenever the WTO has been identified this issue with respect to developing nations, and they do try to promote the international trade with these developing nations. So many developed nations, those are not in favor of reducing the tariff and other sort of rules and restrictions in the forms of NTBs, non-tariff barriers. So they were formulated some rules and regulations specifically for the developed countries, those who are conducting the international trade with these developing nations, by means of formulating some special provisions, and these special provisions are called as special and differential treatment provisions, okay, under which WTO has suggested some policy matters that will promote the international trade with the developing countries, particularly for the developed nations. So what are that special provisions whenever we are talking about this WTO and international trade with these developing nations? Longer time period for implementing the agreement and commitments by the developing nations. So developing nations would require more time to implement these rules and regulations by means of identifying the situation within the own country, and then only they will implement these rules and regulations. Otherwise it would have an immediate impact on the economy of the country. Measures to increase the trading opportunities of these countries. WTO tries to promote the trading related activities not only within the member nations, but they do also try to promote the international trade by means of using bilateral and multilateral trade agreements. Provisions requiring all WTO members to safeguard the interest of the developing countries. So member countries, specifically those are developing nations, WTO tries to promote their economies with the promotion of international trade, and that's why WTO has been made some strong recommendations to the developed nations, those who are conducting the international trade with the developing nations. So they do communicate, okay, they do plan their activities by means of using policy framework and communicated all the nations, those who are dealing with these developing nations. WTO also supports and by means of using or providing some sort of help to the developing countries by using some building some infrastructure for WTO work, handle the disputes and implementing some other technical standards. So WTO not only safeguard the economies of the member countries, but they do also provide some mechanism by building some sort of infrastructure within the member countries, okay, so as to handle the international trade related dispute as well as other technical matters which are being connected with the developing nations specifically. Now these are the WTO member countries. Right now nearly 164 countries are the member of the WTOs. So you are seeing almost the blue part, okay, the shaded region with this blue part, these are the members of the WTO. So nearly 164 countries are the members of the WTO. The countries, those are belonging to some Arab region, okay, and the northern African region, as well as Russia, and these are called as the Commonwealth countries, are not the member of the WTO, but they do also tries to conduct the international trade across the nations. So we came to know that many of the countries in the world are the member of the WTO, okay, and how does WTO are being safeguarding the interest of these various nations so as to promote the international trade. Now WTO and the world trade, how much amount of trade took places across the world. Okay, so you will find, okay, the different types of shaded regions are in this map, world map, and how much trade could take took places from the various member countries, those who are the members of the WTO. India is also a member of the WTO. It belongs to the that much amount of trade, 125 to 250 billion US dollar trade annually the India has been conducting across the many of the countries. We do find there are some countries wherever the developing nations mostly, okay, they are largely involved in the promotion of the international trade. So we came to know, okay, some parts of the world, say for example Northern America, okay, and this part, then Europe and China, okay, as well as Japan and other nearby countries. Those are largely involved in the uh, international trade, okay, across many of the nations. Wherever we are finding some particular other countries, okay, they are having some own individual economic problems specifically with respect to their countries, and they are not contributing well to the international trade. So on an average, majority of countries, those who are tries to promote the international trade, wherever India could also tries to promote the international trade, largely with respect to whatever form of mechanism that exists within the country, and whatever trade agreements, bilateral or multilateral, took places across the other nations. So in this way, WTO are contributing for the development and growth of international trade. So that's all for our today's session. Thank you.